currently working on?
Oh God, that's always an open-ended question. Okay, so let me give a little background about who I am. So I'm Carey Lenning. I am what I like to say, recovering attorney. I was a lawyer in the States for a number of years, and I was working on a little bit of everything related to intellectual property and technology law. And I got more and more interested in data protection and privacy and security. Um, and so I took uh, when I stopped practicing, I took what I knew as a lawyer and I pivoted into working more as a consultant. It turns out that people are more likely to pay you as a consultant because they don't think you're just a high-powered attorney that, doesn't have to get paid or eat or anything like that. Um, and so I've been a consultant for, oh goodness, close to 10 or over 10 years now, focused on, again, initially I was doing a lot of security, IT security, information security work, and also doing, and more readily doing data protection. Now, I know one of the questions that's coming up is one of the other roles that I had, which is for a brief period of time, I was doing something completely different. I've had that problem before. I worked for Palantir, and I did a little bit of, it's kind of a hard role to describe, but I was doing a little bit of competitive intelligence and research for them. And so they had me doing lots of interesting tasks using their products and kind of understanding the business and the marketplace. So, in between being a lawyer, in between doing policy work and doing data protection, I have done a few other things and I kind of elided over those just for the sake of no one wanting to listen to my full background.
It's just to give some context. How long ago was it that you worked for Palantir?
So, I worked at Palantir from 2012 to 2014. It was a long time ago at this point, ancient.
And what did the Palantir do during that period? What kind of products did they provide?
I mean the same products that they have now, except minus the AI stuff. So they are a uh, easiest way to put it is a data analysis engine, a tool that allows people to combine different kinds of data sets, structured and unstructured data, and imagery data, and audio data, and license plates, and everything else that you can think of, and to kind of make sense of all that data. It's a really, really powerful tool for finding things and making connections. That's how I usually describe it to people. That's how I described it to my mom.
Okay. It's always good to be able to explain things in a very simple manner so everyone can understand it. That just proves that the person speaking about it can understand it themselves.
Right,
Um,
right.
so Palantir is nowadays known for its what can we say, AI products essentially, or at least its like role in the AI race and its cooperation with the Trump government. I'm curious about your thoughts on. You say that Palantir specialized and was a leader in data analysis while you worked there. How is Palantir different? Or how is their work different now compared to in the early tens?
I mean, they've always had a lot of government collaboration. So in that sense, that's not new. In fact, I think when I was there, they were starting to work with ICE and Homeland Security and things like that. And so in terms of client base, I don't think and they've worked with the Department of Defense for a long, long, long time, well before I was there. Um, and so I don't think that the nature of their clients changed too much. It was just the focus. And what they're doing now is a lot different than when I was there. And I will leave it at there is a reason I'm not there anymore. And I don't want to go into too much more detail because they have very, very restrictive non-disparagement clauses. So if you ever wonder why ex-Palantirians don't say very much, this is why.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. If we take it more generally speaking, I know you've been following the AI public discourse here over the last months and years, just like I have. And it's kind of a roller coaster. There's a lot of exciting news and there's a lot of depressing news and a lot of worries. Like at the current moment of time, what are you mostly concerned about, and what are you and what are you most optimistic about when it comes to this AI movement?
That's a really good question. And my monitor just died. Oh, there we go. Okay. I think in terms of concern, the main things that I'm worried about, and I've been reading a lot lately. I've been reading or rereading the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, and it's a fascinating read if you've never read it before. But it's even good if it's been a minute, like me. Um, it describes kind of the aphorisms and wisdom of power dynamics. You know, why people seek power and why they, how they achieve it, and the kinds of tactics you need to use. And so what that's done is it's caused me to kind of reframe a little bit the concerns that I have. And I think what I would say I'm most concerned about is power dynamics. I'm most concerned about how these AI tools are being developed. And, there are companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and, yeah, Palantir, who are kind of developing tools with both good and ill use cases, right? I get a lot of value out of using AI systems. Like I am a booster in the sense that I can absolutely see tangible benefits to how a lot of AI tools work. Claude Code is my best friend. I use it a lot, and I'm not a programmer, right? And so that's a really powerful enabler, an enabling force. But obviously, there are also really, really terrible things. You have these terrible nudifying apps, and you have these privacy invading tools where people are using AI to, um, you know, build dossiers or invade folks. Put data together in ways that never was really available before. Um, and or using AI for misinformation and disinformation. And I can see that those negative use cases just keep expanding, and that worries me. A lot of agentic systems kind of scare me a little bit. Not so much because they're evil, but because I think most people don't necessarily know the kinds of limits that agentic systems should have. There really aren't any. I did a blog post recently on agentic AI browsers, and oh man, those are terrifying. They're terrifying because you basically are giving a computer system or a browser that was developed by, again, a lot of these power hungry, in some cases power mad entities. I'm thinking OpenAI and Perplexity here in particular. Uh, and you're giving them a lot of authority and control over what you're looking at online, what you're buying. These systems create screenshots of every website you look at. They record all sorts of details and data, and they, in a lot of their licensing terms, they have pretty much free reign and access to do whatever they want with that information. And I don't think people necessarily realize that. I don't think that they necessarily think introspectively about, what happens when you give an OpenAI or when you give an Anthropic or you give a Google this kind of access. A lot of these tools are getting around what maybe was what I like to think of as friction points. So, you know, Google has a lot of access and a lot of knowledge about you, right? And I have lots of friends who work at Google. So I'm not disparaging Google here, but let's just be honest. You know, Meta, Google, all these companies have lots of information about us. But there was always a friction point. You know, Google or Meta could only track you and only have so much information at any given time. But if you're operating, you know, you're using your browser for everything you do online. And if you have a browser that is basically taking unfettered screenshots and sending that data to an AI system to do agentic commands for you and tasks for you, that's really scary. That's giving a lot of control, a lot of information, a lot of power to one entity. And so that makes me nervous. Those kinds of things keep me up at night because I think a lot of people just aren't thinking about that. And then I have other technologies that are deeply concerning and I worry about a lot, but that's not necessarily related to AI so much as new developments in medtech and things like that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's a very difficult issue. Would do you think it would be correct to perceive it in the way that AI exacerbates the privacy risk and security vulnerabilities that are already a problem today with social media? Or do you think it's more correct to see it as kind of a separate suit of risk, so to speak?
I mean, yeah, like any new tech can exacerbate existing problems. That's definitely true. You know, we have this problem with, you know, the entire origin and infrastructure behind, or the motivation, I should say, behind privacy laws in general was the advent of databases, right? You know, people have always been spying on one another and keeping track of what their neighbors do and gossiping and stuff like that. And of course, you know, when the Nazis invaded, they used IBM and Hollerith machines to, you know, tabulate information about, you know, people in the Netherlands and in France and in Germany and in Austria, um, specifically looking for the Jews and looking for people who they didn't find desirable. So, right, the technology was definitely taking an existing problem and just making it infinitely much worse. And that's true for the internet, that's true for social media, and that's definitely true for AI. But it does, I think they are actually also creating privacy problems. Uh, Again, I go back to that friction point. You know, when you a database is it can be a very powerful tool, but it is limited and constrained by how it is structured and the kind of information that people can use it to process. So the reason a tool like Palantir is very powerful is because they figured out a way to uh, take data and uh, instead of it just being structured like Excel spreadsheets or CSV files or in a typical database relational structure, they figured out a way to allow people to analyze unstructured data or temporal data. And those are different data types. Those are different things. And AI systems are getting really good at that. You know, you can stick stuff into Claude or you can stick stuff into OpenAI, into ChatGPT, or into Gemini, or into Notebook LM, which I use all the time. Um, and it can do some pretty wild, amazing stuff. And for good uses, that's awesome. It's huge time savings. It can be extremely beneficial for people. You can get better context, but it can also be abused real fast. You know, power corrupts, and you know, people are frequently using this stuff for ill gains and ill reasons.
And it's also a very difficult issue to address because, on one hand, no one can really compete with the big tech companies when it comes to AI products and convenience. So in the EU, for instance, we've become really dependent on these companies and products. And at the same time, there are all these issues. They have too much power over our data, the information we receive, and so on and so forth. I know this is a very difficult question to put on you, but what do you think the solution is? Like, how should we address this challenge? Should we just say no more American tech products unless they can comply with our laws, or what is the right approach?
I mean, that would be lovely, I guess, if for people who think that that's possible. If the EU wanted to innovate on this, they could. They don't build in the same incentive structures to make it easy for tech companies to thrive here. And I don't think that that's necessarily only related to regulation, although some parts of the regulation don't help. I think it's more cultural. I think it's more incentives based. EU talks a lot about, I should say the European Commission, not EU generally, but the European Commission talks a lot about, having like sandboxes and these kind of EU focused, enterprises. And there's the oh God, I want to say it's like ESC or something like that. An enterprise, an EU kind of software venture capital fund. And I think those are really cool. And I would love to see more of that, to help organizations, want to be in the EU. The one maybe good thing, the one thing that I maybe would, if I was able to communicate to lawmakers, encourage them to do, is to take advantage of the fact that Donald Trump basically hates smart people now. And he definitely hates immigrants, but he also really does not like experts or smart people or anything that will get in his way. And the EU, and I say this as someone who is a citizen of the EU, we should take advantage of that. We should have our
Hmm.
own modern day Manhattan Project, and we should be pulling all those folks over and putting in some incentives, putting in some structure, making it easier for people. The recent changes, or I should say, the proposed omnibus bill, for example, I think is a step in that direction. Certainly, from a data protection perspective, it's a step in that direction. I think there's problems in some things, but there's also problems in a lot of the existing laws. But what I do see that is a positive movement is that there is, and not just in this omnibus bill, but also in some of the Court of Justice cases and everything else, I'm seeing more of a movement towards appreciation of nuance and technical complexity. I think that would be that's huge. There is a lot of so someone at an event I went to recently called them privacy or data protection ayatollahs. There's a lot of folks out there who really have very strongly held opinions about ideals, what data should be, what personal data should be, how it should be
Hmm.
interpreted, and kind of sets of demands on tech companies. And it comes from a good place. Again, it comes from kind of fear around the power imbalances, and it comes from fear around the fact that big tech really is dominating in Europe. I should say American big tech is really dominating in Europe. But a lot of it's misplaced because there's no nuance in how it's applied.
Hmm.
It's, everyone should treat every bit of inference data as personal data. Pseudonymous data up until, again, this Digital Omnibus Act and the recent SRB decision out of the Court of Justice was kind of a non-thing. It was a thing that was written down in the GDPR, but there was no practical way of applying it because the EDPB, the European Data Protection Board, and the individual and a lot of the data protection authorities had a very rigid idea of it was either personal data or it was not personal data, with zero nuance to contextuality. with zero appreciation of, or at least in my opinion, with zero appreciation of different parties, different entities are going to have different access and different and ability to map things back. And so it disincentivized organizations from um, building in things like privacy enhancing technologies or building in mechanisms where they could collect some data, relevant data, but they didn't have to collect all data. You know, when your approach is, or when the law is basically you have either personal data or you have anonymous data or not personal data, it makes it really, really hard to do anything meaningful. But if
Hmm.
you have a more kind of granular understanding, if you have an appreciation of like, hey, we can build in some technical controls here that basically make it impossible or really, really, really painfully expensive and not really worth the time. We can build in some controls that just say, hey, look, you know, as far as your access is concerned, or my access is concerned, I'm not really dealing with personal data. I'm dealing with something meaningful. I'm dealing with something that I can use for my business, but I'm not dealing with something that can identify or single out an individual. And I think we're slowly getting there. And I want to see more of that. Those are positive changes. Uh, some of loosening some of the rigidity, particularly around the e-privacy directive, which is over what 15 years old now almost. Um,
Ancient
yeah,
history.
ancient history. Yes, ancient history. Like, you know, changing some of those, modernizing some of those things, recognizing that AI does not fit neatly in the, or large, excuse me, large language models do not fit neatly in the boxes that were originally defined in the 80s. You know, I have an entire talk where I discuss how it's difficult for large language models to unlearn data, right? The data protection laws, up until again these some of these changes in the omnibus, um, didn't recognize that. There was no nuance there. There was no like, okay, well, it actually turns out it's really, really hard to erase things. It turns out it's really, really hard to rectify data in a training set. It's not just costly at a economic level, but it's also costly at a technical level. And so yeah, you're not going to get the traction to fix that. Does that mean we shouldn't have data protection laws for AI? No, but it does mean that we probably need to kind of revisit some of the early and long held assumptions about how data should be treated because it's different in different contexts. I'm a big, huge fan of contextuality. I think that's really important. Nuance and contextuality should be more um, advocated for in the EU than it is.
And speaking of the digital omnibus, there was also a proposal in it about training AI models on personal data. As far as I recall, it was something about at AI model providers or general purpose AI model providers, as they're called in the AI Act, could use sensitive personal data or special categories of personal data to train their AI models under certain conditions. And I know that that is one of those proposals by the Commission that there's been a lot of criticism of. Do you have any opinion on it?
Yeah, I mean, I do because I think that you know a lot of the criticism, and I know a lot of the critics. Don't get me wrong. I I think they again come from a really good place. I'm a little concerned with the how weakly some of these initial proposals have been. So it's hard for me to like say, you know, okay, my friends who are opposing them are wrong. But I do think that a lot of the you know initial approaches, at least for training on, in some cases, sensitive information. The I'm looking for my notes because I always want to be very careful with what I'm talking about. Using special categories data, for example, to train for limited purpose like bias detection, I think makes a lot of sense. How do you train out a bias if you can't train with data? And is that, should that be treated the same as if you're using the, um, sensitive categories or special categories data for marketing? Well, no, I don't think so. I think training, making your AI systems better and more inclusive will probably involve some data. And if we make that slightly easier and with the appropriate technical and organizational controls, with the appropriate standards, with the appropriate governance, I think that that can be a good, legitimate use. And I think where I will be very curious to see the European Commission go and this process go is around a lot of what they have said will be those technical controls, uh, the technical constraints in particular. So, for instance, you there's in the law it talks about, or in the proposal it talks about, if a data subject wants removal of certain special categories data, the controller must effectively do something to protect that data if they can't remove it, if it's impossible to remove. I would love to, for instance, understand what that means. I want to know more details. I want to see more nuance or more explanation around what that, how an entity can do that. What the European Commission and also what the EDPB or what the AI office are thinking about when they put that into law. A big complaint that I have voiced many times, probably too many times, is that the EU is big on prescriptive statements or statements about what you can and cannot do, and they are very weak on the how. And I am married to an engineer, and I am friends with lots of engineers, and I deal with engineers all the time. And the how is important. You can say you can't do this or you have to do that or whatever, but they just look at you and they're like, well, okay, but how? How do we do this? What is the process for doing this? I want to see more of that. I want to see
Yeah.
more engagement with, again, with different stakeholders, including, like I said, my friends. I've got friends at EDRI. I've got friends at, Digital Rights Ireland. And I want their involvement as well. But I do think that it is a disservice to come up with laws written by lawyers that have literally no interaction with technologists, that don't go into at least some idea of the how. I get that you may not put that in a GDPR like law, but that needs to be concurrent in the regulatory process. So whether that's the AI office working on that, or ANISA, or the individual data protection authorities, I don't care. I just want to see more technical folks in the room actually like building out the how. The
Yeah.
EDPB kind of drives me a little bananas because they have not figured that part out yet.
Yeah, it's
I
very
and I
theoretical and unclear.
Yeah, it's very ivory tower. It's very much
Hmm.
like, oh well,
Right.
you should just follow the laws. Uh, okay, that's great. I agree, but like how?
Yeah.
Show me. Give me details. Give me guidance. Give me something that's more concrete than just follow the laws. Because I'm sorry, that's just not helpful.
And it puts a lot of burden on the companies that are not really sure on how to deal with some of these regulations and requirements. And there's obviously a lot of complaints about that. I have a bit of a theory that the EU is a bit afraid of taking a hard stance against some of the issues that have had so much media coverage and social media coverage about the dangers of big tech. Do you think it would pay off if the EU took a harder approach on big tech companies and were more like direct in their language towards them?
I mean, I guess the question is what a harder approach is. So they've, the DPC has fined and the European Commission has fined Google and Meta and Apple and everyone else a lot of money. The the problem is that they have fined them, but they have not collected. So to me, it's sort of like, okay, you took a hard approach, but you're not doing that much meaningfully, because they're stuck in court battles and things like that. I don't know if that's on the Europeans necessarily as much as just the how rule of law works. So I'm not blaming them so much as just pointing out a observable fact. Um, I I think what would be better, and I think what has worked in the past goes back to my giving more concrete guidance, giving more engineering support, telling them kind of more details about how to do the thing that the Europeans envision, because I think there's a lot of, especially engineers, especially from the engineering side of the house, folks that are willing to do this stuff if they know what to do. A really good example, I love this law. So the EU passed, I always forget what the specific number is, but it's the USB-C standard. Basically, they went in and they said, all right, Apple, Google, everybody, all you lot, stop screwing around with your own, hardware dongles. Everything needs to be USB-C. It was concrete. There's a
Hmm.
spec behind it. It's detailed. It's like unambiguous, or mostly unambiguous. And you know what? People did it. It was rad. It was so cool. Or the choice
Right.
screens in the Digital Markets Act, right? You gave the EU gave a concrete spec. They said you need to, enable choice screens, and you need to do it in this way, and it needs to include these things, and it needs to include, the top end number of competitors that you have. And here you go. Like, it got done, right? You can set standards, you can set controls, but it just needs to be, clear. It needs to be something that's definable. Whereas, if I get one more thing of like, well, you just need to follow the GDPR, or you need to be fully GDPR compliant, without any acknowledgement of how to do this technically, um, I'm going to lose my mind. And I've talked to so many lawyers where they're scared of the technology, and so they don't really think about complexity. They don't really think
Hmm.
about how to do that. And again, it's like, I'm always willing to come back and say, okay, someone's come up with an actual technical solution. Privacy enhancing technologies are great for this, right? There's tons of things that up until about 3 or 4 years ago, if you had asked me, I would have been like, well, I don't know how you do that in a meaningful way, how how you would get useful information out of data done in a data minimizing, privacy preserving way. Well, now I know. You can use differential privacy. You can use trusted execution environments. You can use homomorphic encryption. And these standards exist and they're being applied. I want more of that. I want the EU to get on board with that. I want them to say, hey, look, okay, if we're moving in the pseudonymous direction, where pseudonymized data actually means something, building in support, building in the development, building in the financial resources to further develop privacy enhancing tools and making them market ready and useful would be huge. Oh my God, if the EU led on that, geez, I'd be all over that. That would be amazing. Because then you're building something that actually allows you to get to the goals you're trying to get to, instead of just saying you must do this thing without any guidance. So that's what I would do. I would, if they would ever hire me to do technical things for them, that's what I would do. Is I would go preach privacy enhancing technologies and how you can do it right. And one of my clients is actually doing that. Um, it kills me that they won't get the recognition that they rightly deserve for it, and that they are still constrained by the same uh, burdens and the same kind of compliance theater obligations that a Google or a Meta or an Apple or any of these other lads are. Uh, because again, there's, even though they're doing the right things, even though they're building in these privacy enhancing tools and they are trying to collect the minimum amount of data, and they're not trying to do things that are creepy and terrible with personal information, everyone still has to play by the exact same level of rules and obligations. And increasingly that stuff becomes cost prohibitive for anyone but the Googles and the Apples and the Metas and it's kind of and the Microsofts. It's kind of a vicious circle. All right, I'm gonna go because I have dinner and beer to go be drinking. So it was lovely chatting with you, though.
You too, Carey. Thank you very much for your time.